December 7, 1941, Sunday morning at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. At 7:55 a.m., the roar of Mitsubishi A6M0 engines shook the skies. Bombs rained down on the Pacific Fleet. Flames and black smoke rose thousands of feet high. In less than 2 hours, 18 warships were hit, 2,403 Americans killed, and 1,178 wounded. 3 days later, with smoke still blanketing the bay, the U.S. War Department realized another disaster. Not from bombs, but from nature and logistics. Across the Pacific, from the Philippines to Guam, from Wake Island to Midway, American troops were deployed in dire conditions. Wooden barracks hadn't been built, and makeshift canvas tents were rotting under tropical rain. In just 3 weeks, canvas deteriorated, stakes snapped, and rainwater flooded ammo bunkers and sleeping quarters. On Luzon, soldiers woke up with mud-filled boots. At Wake Island, 100 mph winds tore through camps, forcing many to shelter beneath abandoned aircraft. A report sent to Washington in January 1942 stated, "Emergency shelter situation. 90% of tents in Guam damaged. Wet ammo stockpiles, 62 soldiers with pneumonia, 14 dead." These cold figures made the War Department realize the real enemy wasn't just the Japanese, it was the tropical climate. In the rainforests of Southeast Asia, a tent had an average lifespan of 21 days before complete failure. Traditional wooden materials were scarce. On small coral islands, trees couldn't be cut, and cement couldn't be mixed. Building a barracks for 40 men took 6 weeks and $8,000 in materials. A tent cost just $1,200, but couldn't withstand wind or rain. General Eugene Raybould, commander of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, was assigned to solve the crisis. Before him lay a Pacific map riddled with red pins, each pin a base lacking shelter. He said, "If we don't have shelter, we'll lose without firing a single shot." Naval Weather Intelligence reported chilling numbers that silenced the room. Ground temperatures in Guam hit 130 degrees. Average daily rainfall during monsoon season was 15 inches, and typhoon winds regularly reached 140 mph. No wooden structure or tent could survive. At the time, the British were using the Quonset Hut, a semi-cylindrical steel shelter invented in 1916 by Canadian engineer Peter Nissen, to endure the North African desert. They were cheap and easy to erect, but weighed nearly 3 tons, required cranes, and the wooden frame rotted in 90% humidity. For the Pacific, this model was useless. By mid-January 1942, the Navy estimated it needed housing for 2 million troops across hundreds of islands. Wooden construction would take 18 months to complete, while General Douglas MacArthur's island-hopping campaign demanded shelter by tomorrow. In Washington, Brigadier General Raybould signed a memorandum directly to the U.S. Navy Bureau of Yards and Docks, BUDOCS. Develop a lightweight prefabricated steel structure, usable worldwide. Assemble in 1 day. At the same time, the War Production Board, the National Industrial Coordination Agency, set strict standards. Maximum weight 9,000 tolerable, withstand 140 mph winds, no concrete foundation required, assembled using hand tools, and total cost under $1,000. A seemingly impossible task, but 1942, America didn't allow for the word impossible. With the entire industry mobilized for war, car factories building tanks, electronics companies producing radar, engineers, steelworkers, architects, even technical farmers were ordered to create a house that could walk. They had to make something as light as a tent, as cheap as sheet metal, and as durable as an aircraft carrier deck. From Pennsylvania to Illinois, hot-rolled steel coils were unspooled, corrugated, galvanized, and batch-marked. The first prototypes failed repeatedly. Frames collapsed, bolts popped, interiors reached 120 degrees F under the Pacific sun. But failure was a lesson. Each blueprint was revised and sent back to Quonset Point, a small naval base in Rhode Island, where a team of civilian and naval engineers worked day and night. There, they would create the legendary steel arch design, the Quonset Hut. From the ashes of Pearl Harbor, America began rebuilding its strength, not just with warships and bombs, but with steel, bolts, and imagination. A house was about to be born, and it would follow the U.S. military to the farthest corners of the earth. February 1942, Rhode Island. On the shores of Narragansett Bay, a small naval base, Naval Air Station Quonset Point, suddenly became the center of a top-secret project. The U.S. Navy didn't choose this location by accident. Rhode Island already had a strong metallurgy industry and expertise in precision steel fabrication, and it was just a few hundred miles from major steel mills in Pennsylvania. On February 12, 1942, in an old warehouse by the bay, the Bureau of Yards and Docks, BUDOCS, convened steel manufacturers, civilian engineers, and Corps of Engineers commanders. The man in charge of the design team, Commander John Philip Drosfeld, an engineering officer who had supervised the construction of a naval base in Panama. On his desk lay a thick folder of blueprints, designs for the Nissen Hut, a semi-cylindrical steel shelter the British had used since World War I. Invented by Canadian engineer Peter Nissen in 1916, this shelter had accompanied British troops to Egypt, Libya, and Malta. Drosfeld flipped through each page. Curved steel arches, interior wooden frame, small square windows. A clever solution for the desert, but useless in the damp climate of the Pacific. He marked the blueprints in red. Too heavy, too hot, too complex. The British Nissen Hut weighed 3 tons, required a crane to assemble, and reached 120 degrees Fahrenheit inside. The wooden structure would rot after just a few months in 90% humidity. But its core principle, the semi-cylindrical arch, was the key. The natural curve dispersed wind and weight efficiently, allowing for material savings while maintaining strength. That was the foundation the Americans needed to improve. To solve the problem, BUDOCS called on Strand Steel Corporation, a Chicago steel company specializing in prefabricated agricultural warehouses. Strand Steel's chief engineer, Otto Brandenberger, was the first to propose something unconventional. Let's eliminate the frame entirely. Let the curved steel panels bear all the weight. A bold idea, almost contradictory to all construction principles at the time. But Brandenberger had seen his Midwestern barns withstand 100 mph tornadoes. He believed a corrugated arch structure could be stronger than concrete walls. The Navy agreed to let him test it. And a new team was formed. BUDOCS, overseeing engineering and military standards. Strand Steel, designing the steel structure. George A. Fuller Construction Company, responsible for fast assembly methods. 3 organizations, 3 different cultures, now had to work as one. They had 60 days to build the first prototype. During those days, Quonset Point never slept. Inside the warehouse, engineers worked 12-hour shifts. One team calculated wind loads and arch angles. Another worked on packing the structure to fit into a 40-foot train car. Every detail was documented meticulously. Each bolt, steel type, and nail code. To meet the one-day assembly target, Brandenberger decided to eliminate the wooden floor, placing the hut directly on dirt, sand, or leveled ground. This reduced the weight by 1/200th and cut assembly time down to 8 hours. The primary material was corrugated steel, the same type used for warehouse roofs. The standard corrugation depth was 2.67 inches, making it 3 times stronger than flat panels. Each panel was 10 feet long, 4 feet wide, and weighed under 50 lb. 4 men could lift it by hand. Engineering calculations concluded. The ideal arch radius was 8 feet, height 8 feet, width 16 feet, and length 48 feet, providing 720 square feet, just enough for 36 soldiers. The biggest challenge was heat and humidity. At night, condensation formed on the ceiling, and by morning it would rain inside. The solution? Install ventilation louvers at both ends and along the roof ridge. A hot-dip galvanized coating at 850 degrees Fahrenheit was added to resist sea salt corrosion. In wartime, speed was paramount. When a blueprint changed in the morning, new steel parts were cut by afternoon, and by night, the prototype was assembled in the warehouse. That method, prototype overnight, later became the golden rule of American industry. By April, they had their first prototype, a curved steel tube with no floor, no frame, held together only by bolts and zinc. Drossfeld assembled it with 6 young Seabees. It took 14 hours, still too long. Brandenburger smiled and said, "Let me show them how Illinois farmers do it." He divided the work into 3 teams, 2 men assembling the ends, 2 bolting panels, 2 securing the roof ridge. The result? 7 hours, 58 minutes. For the first time, a complete military structure could be built in under a day. The official name was chosen, Quonset Hut, after the place where it was born. Within 2 months from raw steel sheets in Chicago, America had created a house that could follow every campaign. A product of industrial ingenuity forged between farmland and battlefield, between creativity and urgency. Early 1942, at the Quonset Point Naval Base in Rhode Island, a team of U.S. Navy engineers completed the prototype of an extraordinary structure, a semi-cylindrical steel hut, lightweight, inexpensive, and deployable anywhere. The first model included 96 corrugated steel panels, each weighing under 50 pounds, 2 wooden end walls with pre-installed doors, and a small box of bolts, all packed neatly into a shipment crate under 14 inches high. Total weight, about 9,000 pounds. Cost, $1,394, 1/10 the cost of a traditional wooden barracks. The Atlantic Sea breeze swept across the hut's silver arch. Commander John Philip Drossfeld, the project's leader, stood before the structure and quietly said, "This is not just a house. This is the triumph of reason." To prove its durability, the Navy erected a prototype right on the shoreline, where the northeast winds were relentless. When winds hit 75 mph and rain lashed sideways, the curved frame gently flexed at the peak and returned to shape. No leaks, no warping. Engineers called it a steel arch that breathes but doesn't break. By mid-1942, Washington officially approved mass production. From Chicago and Philadelphia to New York, steel plants pivoted to manufacturing the new structure. Corrugated steel stamping lines ran non-stop, and thousands of Quonset Hut kits left the factories each week, crated, sealed, and shipped by rail to ports in San Francisco, San Diego, and Seattle, then loaded onto Liberty ships bound for the Pacific. A single Liberty ship could carry around 200 hut kits, enough housing for 7,200 soldiers, a logistical marvel in military history, where architecture became a packaged commodity, shipped straight from the steel mill to the battlefield. As the first steel crates left East Coast factories, they crossed the country by train, then half the globe by sea. Each crate held a complete house, designed so that 12 hands, none of which had ever held a wrench, could assemble it in 8 hours. At Guadalcanal, a mud-soaked island under Japanese fire, the first Quonset huts were assembled in the haze of artillery smoke. At dawn, naval engineers began fitting the first steel panel. By evening, 10 arched shelters stood tall among scorched coconut groves. Inside, mechanics repaired damaged F-4F Wildcats. When a 500-pound bomb exploded just 40 yards away, nearby tents were torn to shreds. But the Quonset Hut remained standing, its steel roof dented but intact. Every soldier inside survived. Word spread quickly over the radio networks. On every newly seized island, Tarawa, Bougainville, Makan, silver arches began rising overnight. They became a symbol of American industrial power, simple, resilient, and present wherever U.S. troops set foot. By 1943, the Navy officially recorded over 8,000 Quonset huts being produced monthly from 10 plants across the Midwest. While a standard wooden barracks took 6 weeks to build, a hut required only 60 man-hours and cost $1,294. Scaled across tens of thousands of units, it was a revolution in military construction. On the battlefield, American troops called them igloos of steel. They weren't just barracks, but field hospitals, warehouses, communication centers, even makeshift chapels. Every arch became a shelter for temporary life amid war. And with every hammer strike, every bolt tightened, beat the rhythm of an industrial machine pushing America closer to victory. But this success came not only from steel and engineering, it came from a mindset that a building was no longer a construction project, but a manufactured product. Built like a car, packaged like a commodity, and deployed as part of the war machine. On faraway islands from the Solomons to the Marshalls, soldiers received illustrated instruction manuals, written in plain English, sometimes with pictograms. So anyone, even without blueprint experience, could build their own roof over their head. Amid mud, smoke, and sea salt, the Quonset huts became the first place American troops could call home. At night, they hung family photos on the steel walls, pinned up hometown newspapers, and listened to the rain drum steadily on the curved roof like the heartbeat of resilience. In Washington, reports flooded in. Frontline units confirmed, "There's nothing better, nothing faster, nothing cheaper." The Navy Department realized they had found the perfect logistical weapon, and in the history of war, no type of architecture had ever contributed so directly to combat readiness. Looking back, people said, tanks, planes, and Liberty ships helped America win the war. But it was the Quonset huts where soldiers lived, breathed, and kept fighting. As the Pacific War entered its most brutal phase, the Quonset huts faced trials far beyond anything imagined in the design room. No longer just drawings or prototypes, they now stood in storms, under bombardment, through freezing cold and scorching heat. Silent warriors of American industry. In 1944, the rainy season arrived in Micronesia. On Eniwetok Atoll, a strip of coral in the middle of the ocean, Seabees erected hundreds of Quonset huts on white sand. Some served as field hospitals, others as ammunition depots, and the rest as soldier quarters. When the first tropical storm hit, with winds reaching 110 mph and rain pouring sideways, waves crashed inland. Wooden structures and canvas tents were gone in minutes, but the steel arches stood firm, anchored by a system of steel guy cables and tent stakes, an idea borrowed from mobile army camp technology. After the storm, as soldiers emerged from the huts, they found devastation all around. Trees down, wooden posts uprooted, but the steel arches gleamed under the sun, a testament to the strength of the design. That same year, at the opposite extreme, in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, the U.S. Navy tested the huts in sub-zero conditions. 40-degree Vorfaft, heavy snowstorms, ice over a foot thick coating the roofs. The first huts cracked at the bolt joints due to thermal contraction. Engineers responded quickly. They used more flexible cold-rolled steel, added nitrile rubber gaskets to prevent shrinkage, and layered 2 layers of insulation between the steel shell and interior walls. The result was remarkable. The Quonset hut became the only structure at the time proven to withstand both tropical storms and Arctic cold. Thus, the Arctic Quonset was born, designed specifically for bases in the Aleutians and Greenland. On the other side of the world, in North Africa and southern Italy, the steel arches faced a different challenge: German artillery. In Palermo, Sicily, a Quonset hut used as a munitions store took a direct hit from an 88mm shell. The blast tore part of the roof, but instead of collapsing, the curved arch deflected the shockwave to the sides. The steel frame held, and the interior only deformed slightly. Engineers reported, a square structure would have collapsed entirely. The steel arch bent, but did not break. That resilience earned the Quonset Hut the nickname naturally blast-resistant, a first for any prefabricated structure. In December 1944, Typhoon Cobra, the strongest storm in U.S. Navy history, swept through the waters off Leyte, Philippines. Winds hit 140 mph, waves soared 20 feet high, sinking 3 destroyers and killing nearly 800 sailors. On land, concrete and wooden barracks were ripped apart. Yet of the 43 Quonset huts at the Tacloban base, 39 remained intact. 4 sustained minor damage, and there were no casualties. When the storm cleared, amid the wreckage, the silver steel arches still stood. The report sent to Washington and filed by the War Production Board read only one line: "Structure meets all test conditions. No replacement necessary." From that moment, the Quonset Hut was officially designated the standard structural unit of the U.S. Navy, a new benchmark for all future field structures. Not just in the Pacific, but across Europe, the silver arches appeared along supply lines from Normandy to Naples. In France, the first huts were erected just weeks after the Allied landings. During the harsh winter of 1944-45, as blizzards and shortages strained the troops, the Quonset huts became field hospitals, command posts, even temporary chapels for soldiers to pray before going into battle. In Belgium, a group of American priests recalled celebrating Christmas 1944 inside a Quonset hut in the snowy Ardennes, among the men of the Battle of the Bulge. By early 1945, over 160,000 Quonset huts had been produced and deployed globally, providing shelter, workspace, and medical care for nearly 6 million people. Midwest factories were turning out 8,000 huts a month. That stark number told a larger story: how a simple engineering idea, curved arches, galvanized steel, standard bolts, became a symbol of wartime industrial thinking, where everything was manufactured like a product, shipped like ammunition, and assembled as part of the machinery of victory. But the Quonset Hut was more than just a symbol of steel production. On the front lines, it became a symbol of survival. On Iwo Jima, among black sand and gunfire, while battles still raged, Seabees assembled huts within range of Japanese artillery from Mount Suribachi. Stakes drove into volcanic ash, bolts tightened amid explosions, and arches joined together in smoke and dust. They called it steel tent in hell. When the wind howled, the hut trembled. When bombs exploded, the arch absorbed the shockwave and flexed back to shape. Survivors recalled, "When everything else collapsed, only the Quonset Hut remained, and we stayed inside, waiting for dawn." From the frozen Aleutians to the jungles of Guadalcanal, from Sicily to Leyte, the Quonset Hut proved that industrial ingenuity could endure the harshest forces of nature. To the soldiers, it wasn't just a shelter. It was a fortress of hope, a place they returned to after battle, where lanterns still glowed even as storms raged outside. As the war neared its end, America looked back at its steel legacy with quiet pride. Alongside the Liberty ship, the Jeep, and the B-29 bomber, the Quonset Hut became an indispensable part of America's industrial victory, not as dazzling as weapons, but more resilient and more real than anything else. For in every human triumph, sometimes the deciding factor isn't firepower or bombs, but a roof strong enough to protect those who fought for freedom. Summer 1945. The war ended. The guns in Europe and the Pacific fell silent. Across military bases, hundreds of thousands of Quonset huts remained, a vast physical legacy that America suddenly didn't know what to do with. On 6 continents, Those steel arches still stood amid the rubble, intact after storms, shelling, and time. They had served as clinics, communication stations, living quarters, churches, repair shops. And now, they posed a new challenge in peacetime. In Washington, the War Assets Administration, WAA, was assigned to manage the massive surplus, nearly 170,000 Quonset huts across the globe. The initial plan was to dismantle and sell them for scrap. But reality took a different turn. Americans didn't want to throw them away. Returning soldiers faced a new crisis: housing. After 4 years of war, civilian construction had come to a halt. Materials were scarce, labor even scarcer, and prices had skyrocketed. Young families, especially veterans, had nowhere to live. The government looked at the hundreds of thousands of idle huts in military storage and realized the solution was already built. The Quonset Hut, which had once saved lives in fire and storm, was reborn as a home for peace. By late 1946, thousands of huts were sold to civilians for just $1,000 to $2,500, less than a quarter of the cost of traditional homes. Veterans were given priority access through post-war housing programs. In Los Angeles, Roger Young Village sprang up. 750 families lived in white-painted steel homes with small front gardens and shared playgrounds. In Philadelphia, Portland, and Seattle, other hut towns formed. People called them Vetvilles, villages of veterans. Inside each curved home, those who had endured war rebuilt their lives from the same steel that had followed them through combat. One young mother recalled, "The house is made of steel, but when my child laughs inside it, it feels as warm as wood." The steel arches spread across the nation. Schools used them as temporary classrooms. Churches turned them into places of worship. In Levittown, Pennsylvania, the first Protestant church was built from a Quonset hut and served the community for 15 years before a new building was constructed. Universities also took advantage of the huts to accommodate the wave of returning students under the GI Bill. In 1947, Stanford University had 270 Quonset huts serving as dormitories, libraries, and makeshift laboratories. At the University of Oregon, arched steel villages covered the campus, symbols of a nation learning how to rebuild using the very materials of war. And it wasn't just America that saw their value. In Britain, France, and Japan, the U.S. military left behind thousands of huts. Local governments repurposed them as hospitals, schools, and administrative offices. In the early years of the Cold War, Quonset huts were even sent to Africa and South America as part of reconstruction aid programs. Young architects began calling them the democratization of architecture, because anyone, anywhere, could build a structure with just their hands and a little patience. By the late 1950s, tens of thousands of Quonset huts were still in use. Some were expanded with wood frames, fitted with extra windows, porches, and even painted in pastel to soften their military look. Children grew up in them, went to school, and became the generation that built post-war America. Others were converted into machine shops, garages, or agricultural warehouses. Midwestern farmers realized that the arched structure could store tractors, fertilizer, and grain without needing support beams. To them, the Quonset hut was a breathing barn, sturdy, easy to clean, and low maintenance. At that point, the engineers who had designed the hut in Rhode Island back in 1942 could never have imagined how long their creation would live. What was born for war had become a foundation of peace, a symbol of industrial vitality and American adaptability. As America entered the prosperous post-war era, Quonset huts became a familiar part of the landscape. They appeared on farms, school grounds, military bases, and in the suburbs, a quiet symbol of an era that had redefined the concept of construction. By the mid-1950s, private businesses began repurposing huts as workshops, warehouses, garages, and repair shops. The arch structure, which required no internal supports, allowed for wide, unobstructed interiors, ideal for arranging machinery. For American craftsmen, it was the place to rebuild business dreams from the very material of war. A used hut could be transformed into a mechanic's shop, a gas station, or a roadside diner. In the Midwest, farmers called them the steel arches of harvest. At ports, they served as temporary storage facilities, so durable they often lasted decades. Later, industrial historians would say no object better represented America's post-war can-do spirit than the Quonset Hut. In the 1960s, as modern construction surged, Quonset huts retreated from city centers, but never disappeared. Thousands were transferred to civic groups, churches, local councils, and rural schools. In Alaska, the steel huts remained the safest refuge against snowstorms. In the American South, they became the earliest form of hurricane shelter, long before storm shelter became a common term. When Hurricane Camille swept through the Gulf Coast in 1969 with winds over 150 mph, most concrete structures were reduced to rubble, but many Quonset huts still stood. The press called them the steel veterans of Wgwutuunsu, still standing guard in peacetime. By the 1980s, with the rise of industrial preservation, Quonset huts were reappraised. Architecture schools from MIT to Berkeley added them to the curriculum as examples of minimalist and efficient design. Architects called them the triumph of geometry over time. They pointed out that the self-supporting arch structure embodied the philosophy. True strength doesn't boast. In many cities, old huts were renovated into art galleries, studios, even upscale homes. Some were kept in bare metal, becoming icons of a new minimalist aesthetic, industrial chic. In the 21st century, as the world faced natural disasters and humanitarian crises, the design philosophy of the Quonset hut returned. After the 2004 tsunami and the 2010 Haiti earthquake, international aid groups used the same steel arch principle to create emergency housing. Lightweight, affordable, easy to assemble, storm-resistant. Modern versions used composite or aluminum alloys, assembled by hand in a matter of hours, yet they carried the same spirit: simple, practical, humane. UN engineers called them direct descendants of the 1942 Quonset hut. NASA and private space companies like SpaceX also embraced the same design philosophy for Martian habitat concepts: self-supporting arches, easy to transport, quick to erect in harsh environments. From the battlefields of Guadalcanal to the plains of Kansas, from Alaskan snowstorms to the Arabian desert, the curved silhouette has never vanished. It's not just steel and bolts, it's proof of how Americans turned challenge into innovation, and innovation into legacy. More than 80 years after those young engineers in Rhode Island sketched the first model, thousands of Quonset huts still stand. Many have been designated National Historic Landmarks, including the original Quonset Point site in Rhode Island, where it all began. Today, travelers can still spot them, along highways, on farmlands, or nestled within naval bases. That steel arch recalls more than just war. It tells the story of human creativity when faced with the impossible. That is the true legacy of the Quonset hut, a humble symbol of America's industrial age, where steel, ingenuity, and perseverance came together to create something more enduring than victory itself, a belief in humanity's power to rebuild its world.